So let me start with a small introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our 6th open lecture for this year. We're glad to have with us Professor Samer Hassan, a computer scientist. Samer is an associate professor at Universidad Complutense de Madrid, if I pronounce it rightly, and also a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society of Harvard University. The topic of his lecture today, as you can see, is Code is Law, the famous phrase coined by Lessing, the American professor, especially in the advent of blockchain. Dear Samer, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, everyone. And thanks for coming. And first of all, I think if we can do this a bit more dynamic than a typical formal presentation in which there are no interruptions at all, I think it would be much more informative, more relaxed, and probably more fruitful for everyone. So please feel free to interrupt me, or I think in Zoom I can, does it make a sound when someone raises the hand? Or if not, just open the mic. And
I don't think it makes any sound. They can either raise the hand, or if it's okay with you, they can speak directly.
Speak directly is fine. So, if you, I mean, I'm no legal scholar, so maybe I am not super formal with my concept. So please feel free to correct me. And yes, please interrupt me. Oh, and as I said, Angelos, before in starting, because of a medical issue, my doctor will call me and I cannot hang them. So I might have an interruption of a couple of minutes during, hopefully it will not happen while I'm speaking, but who knows? Because anyway.
No problem, no problem.
So apart from that, I want to talk about code is law. And specifically, code is law in the advent of blockchain. So how blockchain changes the rules of the game a little bit. So I don't know if everyone is familiar with the pathetic dot theory of Lawrence Lessig, but basically the idea is that this pathetic dot is us, the individual, and how our freedom is constrained, right, by forces that are typically beyond us. So the law would limit our freedoms, and there is a whole judiciary system and police and like punishments in place and rules that make sure that we follow the law to some extent, at the very least. But there are also other ways of limiting an individual's freedom. There are norms embedded in our culture, right? Social norms, how society implements them. There are rules from a market in which if I don't have enough money, I cannot buy, and that is limiting to some extent my freedom in certain contexts, right? And there is what Lessig calls architecture. Architecture originally is related to, it could be nature in general, but also the urban design of our spaces, how the way our cities or buildings of spaces are constructed limit or condition our freedom in some way. But also, Lessig says, architecture can be code in a virtual environment. So code would limit our freedom depending on how this code is designed, the same as how the city is designed would limit our freedom in one way or another, in an offline space or in an online space. So I guess it's no surprise in this room that technology is inherently political. Technology has values embedded to limit in some way or another the things that we can do, right? So if I have certain approaches, I will allow you to do certain things and not others, and vice versa. So the values are embedded regardless even the creator of the technology might not be aware of it, but still the values are there, right? And therefore, Lessig says, code in practice behaves like law. In a bit special way, it's a reductionism. This is an oversimplification, of course. But what it comes to say is that, yes, code can limit your freedom in a similar way as law already does. But it has multiple specificities, code. First, the code of reproduction of code is, well, assuming the cost of the PC that you have and the infrastructure of the internet, it has zero marginal cost. It's free to reproduce code, right? Also, the barriers to entry to create new code are very, very low, right? Anyone can, with the technical skills, create new code, deploy it in a website, and when you visit this web application, you have to move around in the way that this web application decides, in the way that programmers have decided that you can move around. The code can be, it's very adaptable to different circumstances, and as long as the programmer decides, let's say. And specifically, it has these are distinctions from other forms of limiting of limits, let's say. But especially the ex ante limit is especially particular because the law usually acts after the fact, right? But code prevents you from doing what it doesn't want you to do. It doesn't need to have now I'll read the summary. That's why the code prevents us to do something, so we don't need to have a judiciary system in place to prevent you from not obeying the code. The code is implicit, right? And it prevents you before the fact. On Simon's comment, can you elaborate, please?
Yeah, sure. What I want to perhaps say is like I think the cost of reproduction of the code is depends if you think code as a service or code as a product. But of course, like if you think Microsoft Word, yeah, the marginal cost of distribution is zero. But a lot of time you want adaptation. Otherwise, exactly the tools, you cannot really adapt it. And these kind of adaptation are actually expensive. It's why it costs computer scientists cost you a lot. And I think this need to be taken into account. And I think is why a lot of time commodification of code is so, it's where you make money, either as a service or you commodify your product. And perhaps these have some kind of effect, I think, on the landscape.
Yeah, I was thinking more from the side of the programmer. So from the side of the programmer, you can adapt code as much as you want.
Yeah, but you have your time and brain limitation.
Of course. And yet, if you have money and you want to hire many programmers, it's much easier to change code than to change the architecture of the city, right? The cost.
I'm not sure.
Well, I would differ. I mean, if we want to change the streets of Thessaloniki, Actually, it costs a lot of effort. But if we want to update Facebook, it's actually quite easy, much faster.
That's something we should. I'm not sure, because you can actually, like, for example, if you take the price of a big program, it's very high, and when you want to change it, like, you can see actually people have hard time to change. We know some stuff we need to change, and it takes sometimes 8 years, 10 years, massive effort in code landscape. It depends, I think. Sometimes it's very easy, sometimes it's not, and I think this needs to be taken into account.
It's fine. I understand that.
But I'm not 100% positive. I'm just saying perhaps it's not that easy to change all the time.
I understand. And definitely there would be cases in which it's also difficult to understand. Still, I would say that it's easier in general than to change physical space.
I think why is easier, or we think it's easier, it's because you are in a space where if you change, nobody will say, hey, this is my street, I own this place, you can change it and nobody care. As long as you have the time, you can do it. You are free to change it. I would put it like that.
Does anyone want to contribute to the discussion?
I wanted to make a question just to clarify something. When we're talking about the cost, about what Simon says, Simon's objection, so to say, is it because of an inherent problem in the code, an inherent difficulty, or because of enclosures, the main thing being IP rights, for example, yeah? I mean,
no, I was thinking about open source code or code you have the right to change.
Not problems that we choose to pose on code due to through IP rights or other such.
Yeah, exactly. That's another layer. Then perhaps you arrive into the problem of the street, actually.
Should I continue?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay. So, yes. So in practice, if code is law, we can do regulation with code. We can use code to try to enforce law, right? For example, the DRM, the Digital Right Management, I don't know if you're more or less familiar with it, like constraints that are attached to digital objects or software in order to constrain the things that the user can do with them, typically to follow copyright law. So, for example, Netflix attaches DRM to the episodes of the series that you are watching. So even if they are downloaded in your cache locally in your computer, they are encrypted in a way with digital rights management, so you cannot copy them, you cannot, let's say, pirate them easily, right? In order to enforce a law, but in a way that it's preventing you to do it rather than punishing you after the fact, right? Code is also used to circumvent code. To build, you can use code to circumvent enforcing the law. So, for example, you can use something to crack the DRM of Netflix, right? So there is code that is enforcing some law. Okay, you can use more code to circumvent that code and crack it. Or the famous CSS code that was used to crack the DVD's region layers, but that doesn't matter. Basically, that when you buy a DVD, you can only play it in a certain region, either Europe or Japan or North America or whatever. So it was cracked. So you can now reproduce a DVD everywhere if you have the appropriate software. you can directly use it not only to circumvent code, but to bypass directly the law, right? So we all know the case of Napster. To share, in order to share digital content, right? Against copyright law. And we can create code that creates new rules, new types of local regulations, let's say, that you have to follow if you want to use the software. So a nice example of this is what the peer sharing does typically, like BitTorrent or similar protocols. They force you to share in order for you to download, right? You are sharing while downloading, or you cannot download. You have every piece of the movie that you are downloading, you are sharing it to another peer, enforcing solidarity principles in the code, right? Regardless of your values, if you want to use it, you have to share. Other not so nice examples are the typical graphical user interfaces that any social media, for example, uses today, that enforces, well, what you can or cannot do, and the graphical interface enforces some rules. And doesn't matter if you want to change a tweet, Twitter doesn't allow you to edit tweets, so you cannot edit a tweet. Doesn't matter if you have the knowledge to do it, if you, no. Either you delete it or you keep it, but you cannot edit it. You cannot modify an existing tweet. Or similarly, Facebook assumes certain things about the individual and allows you to do stuff following that approach that is overly simplistic of what we can do in a virtual environment, right? So, yeah. In practice, this is what typically code does. And now we can talk about, if there are no more comments, how blockchain changes this. How blockchain modifies this a little bit. So first of all, I want to ask, Angelos told me that there is no need to introduce blockchain. So I was thinking of not doing it. Is it okay? With everyone, I can give a brief introduction or not, or start talking about the smart contracts straight away. I don't care. I'm flexible with both options.
Well, I think at least most of the participants know about blockchain, but if somebody wants to ask, of course, feel free.
Does anyone want me to get a quick introduction of blockchain, or do I?
We're all blockchain literate, at least.
That's fine for me.
Level.
Okay, so I will go on. Basically, when I talk about blockchain, just a quick definition. Oh, there is someone in chat. Yes, definitely. Good point, Alex. So, in practice, when we talk about a centralized system, let's say the personal computers connect to a central server. When we talk, of course, blockchain is not the only way to build decentralized systems. When we talk about blockchain, it's a particular type of decentralized system in which the data is replicated in every single computer on the node of the network, right? So the computers, the users, let's say, do not need to trust one another, like in some cases of decentralized architectures, and they share the same data. They have exactly the same data. So everything is transparent what you are putting in that database, right? Because everyone has access to it and has it locally. And similarly, the computing is distributed because there is another layer of nodes that we call typically miners that take care of the computing power. Why, Simon?
Yeah, perhaps you don't care about the technicality, but yeah, exactly. Because blockchain is like you say, it can be either a specific data structure and organization of those data to decentralize information. But because it was so inefficient, there is other kind of solution to do the same. And a lot of blockchain, like even Ethereum, moving to some kind of other kind of mixed system, and it will not replicate the data everywhere. Or for example, if we take Nano, it's an acyclic graph. The data are not replicated everywhere, but I can access it everywhere as a client. I can access all the data as a client. So yeah,
I completely agree with that. This is a simplification of the concept.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
I don't want to get into the technical details. Definitely, we can have federated blockchains, like kind of Ethereum is evolving to. We will see how that works, but that's the idea, right? Blockchains that are side chains of one another, but in principle, the same principle remains in abstract.
I agree. Just to know which side you are. Yeah.
I completely agree with that. And Alex says, if it's the same for all types, no, it's not the same for all types. IOTA uses different model, and Holochain is not a blockchain at all. So it's not. I mean, Holochain uses the term chain because of fashion and not because it's a blockchain. I mean, I'm totally okay with that. It's just that it shouldn't be confused with a normal blockchain because it's completely different architecture. It's very legitimate. It's just that it's not what we are talking about right now. So smart contracts. So what do we mean by smart contracts very quickly? Basically, it's pieces of code that are executed on the blockchain. So we are talking beyond cryptocurrencies. We are talking about code deployed in a blockchain like Ethereum. And this code is the data that is in the database. So it's what is replicated in the nodes. So there is no server for this piece of software. What does that mean? Why? I mean, the name is terrible, the smart contract name. But anyway, the idea is that it emulates traditional contracts because it's voluntary agreements that anyone can subscribe to freely, supposedly, and they are enforced by law. In traditional contracts, they are enforced by law. In the blockchain, they are self-enforced by code, these law principles, basically. Supposedly, they bring benefits. Okay, we will talk about problems of all this, but theoretically, if you, instead of having, for example, if all the people in this room, we want to create, something simpler. If I want to rent a house to Alex, I can have with a traditional contract, but let's say that I want to rent him something digital. I could use a smart contract where we have the rules of our agreement. And only if he agrees with what is encoded, he would sign it, okay? So theoretically, this is efficient. It reduces cost of negotiation, of the verification. There is no legal hassle, whatever. There are no lawyers involved, theoretically. There is no ambiguity, which is, well, some people present it as a benefit. It can be a terrible thing. We'll see about that. And it automatically executes the terms of the contract, whatever they are. Like any code, right? we are already using smart contracts outside of the blockchain, where in, for example, this kind of, I don't know how do you call this in English? Expenditure machines? No, I don't think so. That someone has the name in English, please. Vending machines. Okay, that's so simple. So in a vending machine, basically, the rules of the agreement, of the contract, are encoded. It's supposedly very efficient. It reduces cost. You don't need a waiter, right? Or a cashier. There is no ambiguity. If you introduce the euro, you will get your M&Ms. It automatically executes the terms, regardless of if there is an error, if there is a human that confused in the number pad one with another, regardless if someone maybe the number pad is very old and the numbers you can barely see them. It doesn't care. It will only execute the code that it has, right? Maybe you introduce the code of something that is empty. There are no more M&Ms. Still, it will move the small circle thingy and nothing will fall down and you will lose your euro, right? And if there is a cafeteria, you can complain to them. But if it's closed, the cafeteria, or there is no cafeteria at all because this is in the metro station, for example, then there is no one to complain about, and you lose your euro. In this case, what you lose is just €1, right? But if we are talking about more complex stuff, this can get at least funny. Because Bitcoin, it also behaves as a smart contract in practice, right? If you want to use Bitcoins, you have to comply with its rules. And they are non-ambiguous. They will automatically execute the terms that are written in the blockchain, in the Bitcoin protocol in practice. And it is supposedly more efficient. I can send money without waiting for 3 days for an international bank transfer, for example, and maybe with lower commission. I can maybe evade authorities if you're interested in that. It has some benefits for some people. I can just speculate with it, right? As most people basically do.
If Summer, I could make a point. It seems to me that it's more efficient, mainly if everything goes according to plan.
Yes.
Because if it
Very
doesn't,
good point.
then it's not efficient at all. I mean, just think, you go to the cafeteria, you talk to a person, you say, I want this chocolate. Oh, we don't have it. Okay, problem solved in a couple of seconds. Whereas, on the other hand, you have to push, hit the machine, and then you just break your hand, and it's getting worse and worse. And so maybe we should keep that in mind. Okay, it's efficient, but if everything goes well, then we don't actually need law and lawyers and judges. I mean, we're human beings, we can cooperate with one another. So
I totally agree with that approach. This has benefits of drawbacks, this technology and this way of doing things. And we have to balance, we have to calibrate, we have to understand that this may be very useful for certain use cases and terrible for other use cases. And ideally, we would rely on humans at some point. We not just on purely technological governance and stuff like that. At least I would support that kind of approaches. Others are much more blockchain maximalists than me and believe that humans are corruptible, machines are not. So from that approach, we should just trust machines. We should not trust humans. So then the more automatic stuff, the more, if there are issues, we should have other machines to solve them, according to this approach. Instead of a human that would solve the machine issue or return you your euro, they could say, no, don't worry, because there is an emergency button that you can press, and another machine, or maybe the same one, will start double checking with new software if you received your product or not, or if not enough time, or if it has passed a timeout, or you know what I mean? And then you solve the problem with more software. And what if that other software fails? Well, then we can, yeah. Well, sorry, there is a comment in Greek that
it says an automated legal machine.
Yeah, kind of.
Some extent, yeah.
What about the smart contracts that trigger human participation, like decentralized disputes? Yes, that's a very good question. I'm keeping things simple for now. I will get into the centralized autonomous organizations later. I'm trying to go very gradual. If you can bring your question later, that would be awesome. Umberto, yeah.
If I may make another point, I think another area where smart contracts may be problematic is in long-term relationships, legal relationships, of course. Because long-term legal relationships, quite often they need to adjust to the circumstances. And there is a question if code in the version of smart contracts that are deterministic, if I understand it well.
In fact, one of the main challenges of of developers of the decentralized autonomous organizations, one of the early challenges was we need upgradability of smart contracts, or we cannot have organizations running on this. I mean, because of exactly your point. If we want, not even long term, in mid-term, it's like we need to change the rules. What do we do, right? So we need to upgrade the smart contracts. There are now technical solutions for that, so we can do that. The blockchain is immutable. Smart contracts don't need to be. Why? Because it's very easy. Basically, you have a pointer that is pointing you to the most updated version of the smart contract. So the pointer is changing when there is a new version of the smart contract. You append it to the blockchain, and then the pointer points to a new smart contract, which is a different one, but it's basically a new version of the same one. If you want, you can still execute the old one. But if you don't want to, you can use the updated version.
So you have like a menu?
Kind of, with the default option being always the most updated one. Okay? So I continue. So basically, we have smart contracts, which are snippets of code executed by the network and are basically autonomous in that way. So a network of miners will compute whatever they are paid to compute. And the users will, I mean, if someone uploads more code, it will be integrated in the database that all the users have. So it will be attached to the blockchain. So that makes these smart contracts pretty much autonomous, the most autonomous pieces of software that we have had, which is very weird, to say the least, right? And they can be ignored, but as long as one user wants to execute them and pays for a operation, like a transaction with them, the miners will execute it. So it will be executed by the network, as long as someone pays some interest to that specific contract. And we can do some things that are more complicated than a smart contract. We were talking about a traditional contract in which there are two parties, right? Typically, which are it's more or less pretty much basic. So I'm renting my apartment to Alex, and he or she is receiving the service in exchange of some money. If we want to build an organization built on top of smart contracts, we can do that. Basically, it would be the equivalent as if we want to create a legal organization. All the people that are here, I don't know how many people are right now here, but let's say more than 15 people, let's say, we want to create an association, a nonprofit. Well, what do we need? Basically, we need the bylaws, right? The bylaws as a legal document, and the bylaws determine how do we relate with each other in the frame of this organization. If there is a president and what the president can do, if there is an assembly that can revoke the president, if there is someone that manages the money, or if it's if the president is missing, what happens, if there is a vice president and stuff like that, it's specified in the bylaws. Or if we need majority voting for removing the whatever, and how, what kind of majority, in which way we decide the stuff, what's the aim of this organization, all this stuff is written in the bylaws. Okay, what if we write, instead of a legal document, code? The same as we did with the smart contracts. We can write code that defines how we are going to interact with each other, how we, the 15 people in the room, are going to relate with each other. How can we decide the stuff? Which method of decision making are we gonna use? Are we gonna vote for each stuff, or only for certain kinds of decisions, and the voting will pass with 50% or with 75, or how? Or all the power will be to Angelos and the rest of us who cannot decide anything, or how we will do the decision making. Well, this is determined by the smart contracts of this organization that we call a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. We were calling smart contracts autonomous. This is kind of an autonomous organization, which is decentralized because it relies on a blockchain. Basically, the bylaws are stored in the network, and the computing of this organization, the operations, are executed by the network.
So, Samer, if I understand it correctly, a decentralized DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, could be actually a dictatorship. I mean, it doesn't have to be something democratic because it's decentralized. We all agree that I can do whatever I want with you.
Yeah.
And it works with DAO.
Yes. I mean, there are people that distinguish being formal. If everything relies, if, for example, the code says that Angelos can change the code whenever he wants, well, it's not very much autonomous. So we could call it the decentralized organization, not so much an autonomous organization. Still, if you cannot change the code, but still you have all the voting power, this is still a decentralized autonomous organization. Maybe it's abstracted. Maybe it says, no, only the token holders can decide, but you have all the tokens. Well, it is a dictatorship in practice, and you are the one that can decide everything. Yeah.
So the constitution, so to say, is free. We can decide what the constitution we
want.
It's
totally open.
Okay.
Totally open. Of course, the advocates of DAOs typically want them to be, to some extent, democratic, because we have plenty of dictatorships. We can have, if we want to have Angelos having everything, why do we need a blockchain? We can have a central server. He decides when the code is changed. We don't need to pay for transactions. It's much easier. It's way more efficient than having a blockchain, right? So then there is no point of having all this hassle if in the end Angelos is going to decide everything. So in practice, what are we talking about? We are talking about complex smart contracts or a combination of smart contracts, okay, for multiple parties to interact. We are not talking anymore about two. Theoretically, the set of rules is incorruptible. At least the proponents of DAOs typically pride themselves in that, because you can corrupt the president of a nonprofit. You cannot corrupt the code of the DAO. And if the process of to update the DAO is democratic, then no one can change it, except if everyone agrees, or at least most of us agree, right? So then it's pretty much self-governed by the members of the DAO, if they are the ones, if it's some sort of democratically elect somehow. The governance can be totally independent from the creator. That is, it can be specified that the programmer has no control whatsoever. If, for example, the token holders are the ones that have the power and the programmer has no tokens, the programmer has no decision making at all. Umberto is saying something. I said that there's a technology. Exactly. Yes, I completely agree with that. It depends on the constitution, as in a country or an organization with the bylaws, right? So, in practice, the DAO cannot be switched off. The same as any smart contract, there is no server that can be turned off. This is why when Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, announced Ethereum for the first time, he talked, we can create a Skynet. Skynet was the bad AI of Terminator, the movie. Why? Because there was no way to disable Skynet. Here we are creating for the first time software that, as long as there are nodes running the code in the platform, no one can turn off a software. Regardless if it's a virus kind of thing that we want to delete, we cannot delete it. The maximum that we can say is tell people, please don't execute this, or update it so the pointer, let's say, of the last updated version goes somewhere else, but still the old version is there, and you can always execute it. And a DAO can be, it's not necessary, but can be self-sufficient. What does it mean? That it may charge users to pay for services. So the DAO can not only spend money, but also gain money. Because with cryptocurrencies, it's very easy to transfer value across a blockchain. It's much easier than with the, well, banking system. I mean, I don't know if any of you have tried to deal with, well, if you are a developer and try to deal with transfer of money in the real world, it's so annoying, okay? Because of these gateways of banks and whatever, it's very complicated. It has, let's say, friction, a lot of friction, while in the blockchain does not, or it does very little. So I need a volunteer, please, to do some example.
Well, I can be the volunteer.
Okay, so I will use very simple examples, and I will try to make it more complex along the way. Angelos, what if I offer you, if you give me a bit of power from your machine, from your laptop, I will pay you in cryptocurrencies, let's say €200 per month, okay? And it's just a small bit of computing. You will not notice it. It will be using it when you are not working, whatever. Would you accept?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did it for free with SETI at home.
So why not being paid, right? So let's say that I ask you not only for computing, but for storage. A bit of your hard drive, and I pay you another 200 euro in cryptocurrency a month.
Okay.
Okay. But what if but the DAO typically would want some assurance that you are gonna keep your end of the bargain. For example, you want to commit for 1 year, right? To do this monthly, certain amounts of power or storage or whatever. So in order to do so, the DAO either has to trust you or has to have a way to punish you if you don't comply with the contract, right? So how to do that in a decentralized manner? They typically do it with money, with an escrow. So I ask you to sign the contract, you have to pay 500 euro in advance. You know that the contract says that after a year of respecting the contract, you will get your 500 euro back. But still, you have to supposedly trust the code. But they say, well, the code will not be corrupted. The code cannot be, if the code says, well, because if the code says, even if I programmed it, if the code says Summer can modify it whenever you want, then typically, would you pay the 500 euro in advance?
Well, no.
No, because we don't know each other that much. I could change it tomorrow and get the money and not give you anything else, right? So the contract has to be autonomous for it to work, because otherwise people will not trust it. The contract has to be, or the DAO has to be, the more autonomous from the creator, the better, if the creator wants it to succeed. Because otherwise you will not pay the 500 euro in advance. The code has to say, don't worry, Summer cannot modify this. No one, if it says no one can modify it and you understand the code, would you agree to pay in advance and after receive 200 a month? And what if it says it can be updated, but only by the majority of the people that have agreed to the contract?
Well, this is a no-goer in our case because we are just two.
Yeah, but if this is a DAO, there can be 50 people that are agreeing to give me power and storage.
Well,
and you know that there are other people, other friends, other real people that are behind this, doing this, receiving it.
There is a danger that the majority will decide against me.
It can happen, but they would be all the damage because your interests are aligned of everyone. If it wouldn't, if it says escrows are not returned and they are all they all have to pay 500 euro, well, typically they wouldn't decide that, right? It would be against their own interests. So typically they say that the incentives are aligned for you to accept to pay the escrow and for the people to decide the changes that they are comfortable with.
This is actually relational contracting. I don't know if you know the term from institutional economics. Relational contracting.
I actually don't know it. Can you elaborate?
Contracts that you design in such a way that you don't need to go to the courts because you give initiative to the people participating to withhold the contract, or initiative not to change it.
Yeah, I mean,
this is what brings me in mind to what you're now talking about.
That makes sense. So going beyond computing and storage, let's say, Angelos, can you code?
Can I what?
Can you code? Can you develop software?
Develop what?
Software. Can you program code?
No. A little bit of basic, if you remember.
Okay, basic is enough. So let's say that, let's see, we have, oh, yes. So let's say that you can.
You're not going to examine me now.
Sorry?
You're not going to examine me now.
No, don't worry. Imagine that the DAO offers you as something a bit more elaborate. Not only storage or computing that is more passive, but no. They will ask you to modify a specific software in GitHub, solving a bug, for example. And you are capable, you know what the software, you have dealt with it in the past, you would be able to solve it. And the DAO will say, I'll pay you this amount of money if you do it. If you, let's say, solve 3 bugs, let's say, I mean, in a very basic way, 3 bugs a month during 6 months. And they will pay you 3,000 euro in cryptocurrency a month. For doing this, that will take you, well, like a part-time job.
Yeah, okay.
Would you, of course, you have to pay an escrow in advance, knowing that it will be returned. If you fail to, if after 1 month, you stop doing it, right? Would you agree?
Yeah.
So then, who has hired you?
I knew you were going to examine me.
But not about development.
Well, legally speaking, of course, not the machine.
But in practice?
In practice, yeah.
I mean, maybe I created the software, but I have no influence over the software whatsoever, right? All the members of the DAO, well, if the DAO has members, yeah, but what if it is just a smart contract that someone deployed, it has no members, someone sends it money, and it can hire people?
Well, there are 2 possibilities. Either there is a multi-party DAO. In that case, one could assume that, legally speaking, there exists an association between these people. So the association has hired me through this mechanical device. Or if it's only you, and there is no multi-party, in that case, of course, you have hired me personally, I mean.
But what if you don't even know who deployed it?
Can I
yeah, this is
This-
a problem of real life, of course. But as I always tell my students, I maybe kill you and cut you in 100 pieces. If nobody finds out, I'm free. I'm a free man, yeah? So please, to ask something.
Please.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I am a member of the Aragon Association in Switzerland, and we are legally protected by the Swiss law, and the Swiss law says that if anybody is sued by anyone in the world because of let's say the DAO is sued, then we are all protected by a certain amount of money. And researching about this, I found the case that when a person specifically a person or the DAO itself is sued, then if they're not, because maybe they're anonymous, so the process will delay a lot until they find who is the responsible, and like they will go for like looking for who developed the smart contract, and that would be like the first person to pursue. But at the end, all the members that signed as members of the DAO will be responsible of the actions of the DAO. That's what I found out.
That's sensible. Although that would apply in the case of Aragon. I don't know if that would be the same in other platforms like, well, whatever, DAO Stack, Colony, DAO House, whatever. But yeah, definitely it brings interesting questions, right? This is changing somehow the ecosystem that we are very used to manage. And it takes further the construction of the firm, right? What about the programmer who deployed the smart contract? Yeah, but it's a bit complicated to blame just the programmer, because the programmer just deployed some rules, and you could argue maybe the programmer didn't put the money there, didn't choose the person, didn't do any selection, didn't do anything. Maybe this DAO is basically being a broker between people that want to pay for a specific library to have less bugs, and the DAO that finds developers to fix those bugs, right? So the programmer just programmed a broker, and maybe, I mean, maybe people are paying for this library to get better, but maybe other DAOs or other machines or other smart contracts are paying. So, anyone wanted to say something?
Well, I think that the programmer, if he didn't just write the program and then sold it, whatever, to the association or to a third party, the programmer is offering a service through internet by putting this program on the internet. So I think in some way he will be responsible. If it's just a programmer in the program, yeah?
I honestly don't know. I mean, well, and it can get more complicated. Sorry?
I do, trust me.
Of course, it can get very complicated, because maybe there are many programmers, and the controversial parties just one commit from someone in GitHub, or the combination of them, or maybe it was deployed by someone if no one knows more than a hash of an identity. It's tricky at the very least. So the DAO in practice can be hiring a service, selling a service, storaging money, acting like a firm in practice with high degrees of autonomy. And this can go further, right? So there is a nice meme on the blockchain. Nobody knows you're a fridge, because as long as there is an identity, you don't know if there is an identity, there is a human behind the identity, or there is a machine, or what there is behind it. You just care about what their operation are doing with you, right? So if it's a fridge who is maybe detecting that you have you are low in milk, and asks to a DAO supermarket, hey, I pay in cryptocurrency, send me milk, and suddenly the human owner of the fridge receives the milk that his fridge or her fridge has purchased. Well, it was the fridge who did the whole interaction, right? Who did the transactions and whatever. It gets more and more complicated. We can have, because in practice, you would need, here you would need a way to verify in GitHub that Angelos is solving those bugs. So at the very least, even if you rely on a community agreeing to those commits that are humans, you still need something in the blockchain that takes information from GitHub for the DAO to know. Because if it's not in the blockchain, the DAO cannot know, right? So that's what we call oracles. Oracles are basically entities that are bringing information from the real world into the blockchain. We could have hardware oracles, like some device that is in my window and checks the weather and records it daily in the blockchain. What temperature, what CO2 levels, or whatever. And then other smart contracts, DAOs, whatever, can compute with it, can play with it. As long as it is in the blockchain, you can have similarly some oracle that is basically doing as an RSS of GitHub and introducing the information that is the changes of a project or whatever. And we can even go further, right? We can talk about a smart property that read the blockchain state and react to it. For example, we could have a car that is activated via a crypto key, and only if I have this special token that is the key, the car starts. And if I don't hold this token, I cannot start the car, right? So basically, this is smart property because it's checking if I have reading the blockchain and taking decisions based on that. And of course, the DAO can buy you the key. It's a token in the end, right? So the DAO can suddenly not only hire services, sell services, they can own stuff. Is the DAO owner of the car? Not really. The car is still out there and has some legal papers and whatever. Still, only someone with that key that the DAO holds can run the car. Otherwise, the car is junk in a garage. So you would have to purchase that key from the DAO in order to, so it acts as a pseudo property in practice, right? It is blocking your access to this property. So blockchain, we have been seeing how, well, it's at the very least a step forward in the code is law paradigm. We can even talk about law is code, not only code is law. We can embed new regulation in code that is done in a decentralized manner and with plenty of implications. So these specificities of code that we mentioned in the beginning are totally adopted in the blockchain, right? We still have, it's still very easy I mean, things change a bit, but still for the programmer, the barriers to entry are low, the cost of reproduction is low, the adaptability is high, and it still is ex ante, right? It prevents you from doing things. It's code in the end. So some examples of this. If I'm approaching to the end of the talk, so I don't know if you want to talk, if you want to interrupt or wait till the end, whatever you want, okay? But I continue otherwise. In the end, the smart contracts are designed in a way to be self-enforceable. So the primary function of them is to some extent, replace enforcement. So regardless if there is a legal rule behind it, like in the case of copyright rule or whatever, the blockchain can enforce new rules, new laws that apply only if you're interacting with these spaces, of course, right? And we can use it to incorporate legal provisions into the code. The same as the DRM, but much farther. And it has multiple implications. As we said, the law is ambiguous, but the smart contracts are not. The law is flexible on purpose, and the smart contracts are not flexible at all. So as Angelo said in the beginning, the vending machine, if everything goes well, you will get your M&Ms, but only if everything goes well. The same, the smart contract will work, and if everything goes well, well, great. If not, well, there is no ambiguity. If there is a traditional contract from a landlord or a landlady, I can talk with them. If I have to pay late 1 month, right? And probably they wouldn't mind a couple of days late because of an issue I have, changing jobs or whatever. If it's a smart contract, my key might not open my house because I am 1 day late, because it's non-ambiguous, non-flexible. If it's programmed that way, it will follow that strictly, right? It will be precise and not like the law applicable case by case. I mean, the law does not necessarily foresee all cases, and that's good. That's okay, because then we can have judge rulings adapting to real world, right? The scenarios. Here, it doesn't need to be like that. If we rely totally on code, on algorithmic governance, and there are no humans behind it when it fails, well, then you have to foresee all cases in the code, because otherwise things might go wrong. Law, at least in countries enjoying some sort of a democracy, the creation of these laws follow a democratic process. And laws are a common, right? A common good. They are public. Everyone can read them. They are explicit. Typically, they are universal. They are transparent. They are somehow collectively agreed, at least through representatives. We can, of course, discuss about the quality of our democracies or how questioned they are, but to some extent, law works because more or less we have functioning societies where the rule of law applies. In the case of code, well, there is no democratic process typically. Of course, if we have a DAO that has a functioning democracy and that adapts its rules to itself, well, then we can have something that we can trust more. But typically, these are private actors. Typically, software and hardware builders, we say, blockchain is trustless. Well, we are just placing the trust not on the traditional server owner or infrastructure owner, but on the coders, on those that, well, are deploying the code. It's fine, we can trust them if it's an open source community maybe, or if it's someone that we trust a lot because of their reputation. But there is trust there, right? And it's private actors. There is no public process like in the state. It has good things, it has bad things. Some people say it's wonderful that there are no politicians involved here. Some people say this is totally undemocratic. Well, I guess it depends on the case and the approach. In practice, they are imposing arbitrary rules. or we are. Without public debate, unless we enforce one, I mean, unless we have a democratic DAO, like I was saying, with plenty of effort for making it work, it does not necessarily to be like that. It doesn't need to have public debate. And of course, if we talk more about proprietary software, then the thing gets even more complex, right? But even in the case of open source software, these things are still an issue. And I love free open source communities, and yet these things are still an issue, right? So in law, we have plenty of legal safeguards, right? For example, if I force Angelos with a gun in his house, you have to sign this contract. Well, the DAO doesn't know. If I do it with a traditional contract, the contract is void. If I do it with a smart contract, the contract is not void. The contract applies, regardless if there has been coercion, because the DAO cannot verify if there has been coercion or not. Or if Angelos was a minor, maybe a child of 8 years old. Well, that's actually, child labor is kind of illegal in many countries. The DAO would accept your labor without any issue. This protection of a judicial system that the law provides, well, smart contracts don't need to have it. It's true that some ecosystems like Aragon are trying to provide that, some sort of, well, Aragon court and all that with humans. But we will see how this evolves, because this is totally new, uncharted territory. In practice, this is contracts will be self-enforced regardless of the validity in legal terms. Maybe we need further development. Maybe we need cascade smart contracts that verify each other. Maybe we need federations that comply with certain, for example, DAOs that commit against child labor. And if certain organization says that this identity belongs to a minor, it will not accept it. And DAOs will join this federation or not. And then you might choose to only work with DAOs that join this federation or that comply with certain rules, right? These kind of devices have to be deployed. They're still not there. In practice, well, there are questions on liability, as we were talking. There are questions on regulability, on censorship. How can you censor a DAO? Well, it's kind of potentially they are unstoppable, right? You cannot turn them off. So, I mean, and there are, for taking the smart property of the smart car example, there need to be some kind of transfer of the physical car. The key is not enough. And transfer of the legal ownership. Again, the transfer of the key is not enough, right? There has to be some interfaces with real organizations and with real legal systems. Even if DAOs want to be on their own, they cannot. Even for blockchain maximalists, we still have human bodies that exist in a space under the rule of law, right? And of course, you can buy a key of the car and still maybe the state of the car is terrible and maybe it doesn't work. So it has plenty of risks inherently to that, all this. So ending here, there is someone in chat. Lime scooters in Thessaloniki. I don't get the local example, Alex. I'm sorry.
Well, it's a local joke because people were just throwing them in the sea. So it doesn't matter how the code was enforced to use the scooters if they were underwater. So that was a kind of a movement in our hometown here.
So maybe someone activates it with their card, but someone else uses it or stuff like that.
No, that was people just getting angry with Lime scooters and throwing them in the sea physically.
Okay.
So that is it kind of, it disrupted the Lime business model for sure.
I understand that.
We have a harbor like Barcelona here in Thessaloniki.
Okay. Okay, so finishing. In practice, plenty of people advocate for the utopia that this technology can bring. And it's true, it has democratic potential. And we can expect, I mean, for the very least, it's a place of experimentation with techno-legal frameworks that it's very interesting. Personally find it fascinating. And hopefully it can aid decentralized collaboration, maybe helping with scaling, maybe helping with automating certain things, maybe helping with rewarding engagement in communities. There are multiple ways in this could benefit decentralized collaboration potentially. But these risks that we were talking about we can perfectly also imagine a dystopia in which we have inflexible or even totalitarian network governments, or even a decentralized panopticon in which I cannot open my house or the fridge doesn't open because I didn't pay whatever, and because I'm surrounded by smart property, or they are buying stuff on my behalf. Well, it kind of gets complicated. And that's it for today. So
well, thank you very much. Let's give the floor first to, oh my God, I have to see it, to see this message. Anybody from the audience wants to make a comment, ask a question? So let me start with a question. Summer, if I've got it right, smart contracts are maybe very good for simple one-dimensional transactions. I give you €1, you give me your hat. Okay, this can work with smart contracts. Or like you said, my fridge can buy milk from the supermarket and it's just two computers talking to each other. Okay, I can get this. But there is maybe a difficulty in slightly more complex situations, like you said, oh, I lost my job for one day, I couldn't pay, or we can have other scenarios that are not something extreme bad has happened, but okay, we have to adjust, like I said before. And my question is, so this lack of flexibility inherent in smart contracts, could this be, could this problem be addressed by combining smart contracts with some form of artificial intelligence that could evaluate the situation? First of all, if it's technically possible, I don't know.
Okay, so first, there are things here that apply to traditional code as well. And we are already embedded in virtual environments with business transactions in which code determines our actions. For example, in Airbnb. Airbnb is a community in which I trust Airbnb, the corporation, to be the mediator. And Airbnb has created some rules in their platform, and we all submit to their rules, both owners of apartments and the ones renting them. We all rely on that code, right? And if Airbnb wants, can have very unfair rules. And in fact, well, there have been multiple scandals. For example, with Uber, there have been, well, with Airbnb as well, with some racism and stuff, debates and whatever. But how Airbnb responds, trying to adapt the rules to the scandals. The platform infrastructure owners try to adapt to the scandals, because the scandals is the only way they react, basically, because they give no governance power to the users. In a DAO, the DAO can be the owner of the platform. Well, the owner, basically, the DAO can be the service that the platform is provided. And in the ideal world, the users have governance power. And if we face problems, the users are the one deciding how the platform code is changed. So that can be very, very efficient for our platform economy. Who evaluates which kind of power, which kind of problems and which kind of solutions we have to implement in the code? Well, that depends on the case. We could have a committee of humans doing this job. We can have just totally decentralized, the community will self-organize, blah, blah. Okay, maybe someone will propose changes that will be voted, and if all the people, most of the people want it, this change will be implemented, blah, blah. We can relay in software pointing out problems, being with a classical machine learning AI thingy or not. We can rely on software telling us, take care, because in this case, this will happen. We can rely on simulations, for example. We simulate how this software would behave. We put in multiple scenarios that are simulated. We run thousands of different scenarios, and the computer tells us, the software tells us, look, in these specific scenarios, there were these problems. Maybe you want to change the code. I don't know if that responds more or less.
Well, what we're describing in smart contracts is the execution of legal contracts, right? The performance of legal contracts. If you do your part, I'll do my part, and this is secured by the smart contract. I can't change my mind. Say, okay, Summer gave me the hat, I won't give him the euro. That's okay. And of course, normally I'm not allowed not to perform, but of course, there are some cases in law that there are excuses for non-performance. There are some cases in law that I will not perform my part, you do your part, I don't do my part, and it's okay. A classical example would be force majeure.
Would be what? Sorry?
Like a supervening, I'm sick and I'm in the hospital, I'm in a coma.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, what can I do? Excuse me, I delayed one day to pay the rent, but I'm in a coma in a hospital. And of course, people can evaluate this, and that's what we do all the time. But the question is, can a computer, can the code, can the program evaluate this? And I think that if some branch of computing science could do that, this might be AI and not smart contracts, unless I'm terribly wrong.
I mean, definitely, if we need computing power, we don't want to rely on smart contracts, because they are computing power-wise, they are very expensive. It's very expensive to transact, to execute computation, because it has to be distributed, blah, blah. While AI, machine learning, relies on the opposite, right? Huge amount of data that is centralized in a place and compute. It might rely on a grid, but we don't care about that. It's not the decentralization that we care about. Basically, there is one owner of the whole of that piece of infrastructure that will put either one machine or all the machines aligned to solve this specific problem, right? And they will work on that and whatever. Definitely, if the evaluation requires computation and plenty of data, it's AI or humans, not smart contracts. But we can rely perfectly on other stuff. We can rely on points of trust. The same as we can have oracles, and we trust that the oracle will not invent the data when it records it in the blockchain. We can compare it with the outcomes of other oracles, for example, to verify it or whatever, or maybe it's an institution that in the real world has a lot of reputation, and then we would put some trust there. Similarly, we can do that with evaluations of a machine that, well, it gives some inputs for the house, and we can trust those inputs, and that's fine. Yeah.
We have a question from Vasilis.
Any new empirical data regarding the ecological footprint on the gas blockchain application? I didn't get into the ecological footprint at all of all this. As it's very common, it's very well known that the ecological footprint of, for example, Bitcoin is really terrible, and it is not gonna change in the short term. But this is mostly due to the proof of work algorithm that they use, which is any new generation blockchain doesn't have the same issues. The ecological footprint is way less with proof of stake or other mechanisms. And the Ethereum, which in practice most of the ecosystem relies on, is evolving towards relying only on proof of stake. So hopefully we will not have the same terrible footprint on smart contracts and DAO that mostly rely on Ethereum. We will continue having that in Bitcoin, though. I don't see anything, any way of that going away in the short term. Yeah. I don't know if someone in the audience have more information about that, but. Did I respond, Vasilis? Yes, SolarCoin had an interesting model, I agree. Because rewarding solar energy creation, it's interesting.
Any other questions? Alex?
I can try. I will try using my camera. Let me know if if I break a lot, so I switch it off. Very interesting presentation, Samuel. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a bit relevant to the previous question as well. One of the common exercises I like to do whenever I read something new about the blockchain is to think whether this can also work without a blockchain. So, and usually the arguments for that are about, well, most often than not, efficiency gains. So this is nice to beg the question on how efficiency is actually conceived here. Because in most of the cases, the underlying assumptions is that we want a thing that is predefined and beneficial based on some assumptions to both parties to be executed as quickly as possible with as little human intervention as possible, because human intervention causes friction and also money. You need to pay the people to do that or incentivize into doing that. So, and here is where these cases become more interesting in whether we can deploy this technology in thinking in different directions and not only maximize efficiency in the sense of producing more profits or moving more money around as quickly as possible with as little human intervention, but achieve things that wouldn't be otherwise achievable. For instance, creating, so to say, financial products that can unlock money that is just accumulated in a certain place and, you know, just being zombie money and being diverted to green investment, you know, social housing projects or whatever.
So
I don't know if
what's the question
if you got
exactly,
that, because
Alex?
I think my connection broke a bit.
No, I think I heard it, but I didn't understand what's the
Yeah,
question specifically.
So yeah, finally, what I wanted to ask is whether there are any uses exploring such potentials that have different objectives in deploying this technology.
Well, the use cases are many, actually. In fact, we did a report for the European Commission on blockchain for social good, exploring, mapping the ecosystem of blockchain for social good in Europe. Basically, okay, what are applications of blockchain beyond finance that try to have some nice social impact, right? And we filtered out vaporware and toys, let's say, and we just stuck with things that at least have a working prototype, pilots, real users, stuff like that. And there are actually many attempts of applying this technology to good causes. Pretty interesting projects. SolarCoin that Vasilis was mentioning before is one of them, but there are many. I can give you the link if you want to the report. I don't know if that would be useful. No, DLT.
Yeah, I was more or less heading to that direction, actually. This is really useful for the discussion. And Angelus can redivert the discussion back to more legal interest, to the extent that, for instance, would you see a reverse approach by, as you said, you can use code to create new legal provisions, and for many cases, there are legal barriers for doing something that has social impact. Would that be a way to potentially envision also creating new possibilities and then feeding them back to the legal system to address some of these barriers and experiment with new things and so on? So that's just a more speculative discussion, basically. I don't have any empirical evidence for that.
I do believe that we can experiment with very interesting cases. Like, as I was talking in the beginning about BitTorrent enforcing solidarity in the network through code, we can experiment with very interesting governance models in DAOs and see how people organize with them. And we can play with economic models. We can play with how people do things together in different ways. And that's interesting. I don't know if it would be better or worse, to be honest. I hope it would be better, at least in some cases, so we can learn the stuff and experiment and grow the things that we care about, right? Being the lives of humans or digital commons or stuff like that. But I don't know.
Well, there is maybe a very simple experiment than what one could try to organize a DAO to program a DAO according to the rules of associations. The association, the societas, the old Roman societas, is the basic form of human cooperation. It can't get more basic than that. The idea of an association is that we gather together and we join forces to achieve a common purpose. I mean, that's all. Of course, there are rules for how we do it, but this is the main master plan for simple peer-to-peer human cooperation. There is no hierarchy. We have a general assembly. We have a democratic way to decide things. And maybe the one simple experiment would be to try to make a DAO fit in the legal rules of an association and see how it works.
Actually, I think that typical associations have. Sorry.
No. I just wonder that maybe if this experiment succeeds and it's technically possible to make it work, maybe then we can open the next step of this discussion that would eliminate the problem: who hired you? Like you asked me in the lecture, right? Because then we would start talking if this DAO could be formally a legal person.
As far as I know, the experiments that have been doing, they try to be more decentralized than a traditional association, in the sense that a traditional association usually has two main organs: the assembly and the steering committee, or however you call it.
But doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to. So
it has to have a general assembly. This is obligatory.
I understand that. I understand.
If you wish, you can do it, but you don't have to.
So the typical DAOs that I have seen, they try to have just the assembly and people voting on that. And we have plenty of DAOs that are functioning and voting on stuff and deciding stuff and moving forward and more or less working. Of course, it's a very young ecosystem, and it's mostly full of geeks, but so the cases are a bit constrained, but still, I think they do work. In fact, we have been trying to do some data science on existing DAO communities to see how they are working, how the ecosystem is evolving, or whatever. We took in particular one governance model that the stack has holographic consensus. That doesn't matter. A governance model that they are using, and we tested it, and it seems that it's working. So it seems that they are working, and that at least in a smaller scale, these governance models have potential to grow, to facilitate scalability, to facilitate cooperation. Of course, it's mediated with some complicated issues, for example, matching identities with humans, or making equivalent token holders with voting rights. There is some controversy there, and yet it seems that it's working. It seems that at least the experiments that we are seeing are moving forward. So there are reasons to be hopeful at the very least. So what you said, it has already been done. We have proof that at least the very basic form of association works on a blockchain, on Ethereum, using Aragon or the stack or the house, basically.
Any other questions or comments?
There is something I didn't read. Okay, some interesting links.
So if we have no other questions or comments, as it seems, Well, Summer, thank you very, very much for a most interesting discussion. I won't call it a lecture. Thank you very much for your presentation. And thank you everybody for participating. We hope that we'll see you all again maybe in some of our lectures. And of course, Summer, we hope that we'll keep in contact now that we've met each other. Everybody, well, good night from us, the organizers. And once again, thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks everyone for inviting me. It was very interesting.